Before the world ended, I didn't belong to it. That's the simplest way to put it. I slept behind a boarded-up pharmacy on 3rd and Lincoln, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like rain and old cigarettes. Most nights, I counted my ribs to remind myself I was still alive. Most mornings, I woke up surprised that I hadn't died in my sleep, from cold, from hunger, from someone deciding I wasn't worth the space I occupied. People passed me like I was already gone. Some dropped coins. Most didn't look. You get used to that. You learn the rhythm of survival, what dumpsters were worth checking, which security guards were lazy, which alleys stayed dry when it rained. You learn how to disappear while still being right there in plain sight. So when the dead started walking, it didn't feel like the world ended. It felt like it finally caught up to how I'd been living all along. I remember the first one I saw. It was a Tuesday. I know that because Tuesdays meant the bakery on the corner tossed out unsold bread around 7 a.m. And I'd been waiting nearby. The guy stumbled out of a parked car, stiff and jerky, like his joints were rusted. At first, I thought he was drunk or strung out. I'd seen worse. Then he turned. Half his face was gone. Not metaphorically gone, like something had scooped it out. His eye hung loose, bouncing against his cheek as he moved. I didn't scream. Didn't run either. I just watched. Because here's the thing. When you've lived on the street long enough, your brain stops assuming anything is impossible. Weird doesn't shock you. It just is. He lunged at a woman walking past. That's when everything changed. She screamed. He bit. Blood hit the pavement in thick, dark splashes. People ran. I didn't. I stepped back into the alley and waited. That's survival. Not bravery, not stupidity, just waiting. The city fell apart faster than anyone expected. Sirens screamed for days, then stopped. Helicopters circled, then vanished. Phones died, power flickered, then went dark. And the people, the normal people, the ones with homes and jobs and routines, they panicked. That was the difference between them and me. They had something to lose. The first week was chaos. I stayed close to what I knew. Alleys, rooftops, places people didn't think to look. I watched the streets fill with those things. Zombies, I guess we call them now. Back then, they were just wrong. They moved slow, mostly, not like the movies. Stiff, hungry, persistent. But people made it worse. Looting, fighting, screaming. I saw a man stab another over a backpack full of canned beans. I saw a family lock their own daughter out of their apartment because she had a bite on her arm. I saw things that should have broken me, but they didn't, because I'd already been broken. By week 2, the noise died down. Less screaming, fewer gunshots, fewer people. That's when I started moving. The house wasn't part of some grand plan. I didn't wake up one day and decide I deserve something better. No, I found it by accident. I'd been following a stray dog through a quiet neighborhood, one of those places with trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes, the kind of place I used to avoid because people called the cops if they saw me. The dog slipped through a broken fence. I followed. The back door of the house was wide open. No blood, no bodies, just empty. I didn't trust it at first. Places like that didn't stay empty. I checked every room, kitchen, living room, bedrooms, closets. Nothing. Upstairs, I found a bathroom with a tub still half full of water, gone cold and gray. A towel hung neatly on a rack, like someone had planned to use it. That's when it hit me. Whoever lived here didn't leave slowly. They ran. I stayed the night. Just one night, I told myself. The bed felt wrong, too soft, too clean. I slept on the floor. The next morning, I locked the doors. It didn't happen all at once, the change. At first, I just used the place as a base, somewhere to rest, to eat, to think. But then I found the pantry. Cans, boxes, bottled water, more food than I'd seen in months. I ate until it hurt. Then I slept. For the first time in years, I slept without one eye open. Days turned into weeks. I started cleaning. Not because I cared about cleanliness, old habits don't disappear that fast, but because I could. I washed myself in that bathroom, scrubbed layers of dirt and street off my skin until I barely recognized what was underneath. I shaved. That one hit me harder than anything. Seeing my face again. Not the version of me that people ignored, but me. The garden came next. The backyard had one of those raised beds, rich soil, tools still leaning against the fence. I didn't know much about growing food, but I knew how to try. I planted seeds I found in the shed, watered them, waited. Most died. Some didn't. That was enough. And the zombies? They became part of the routine. That sounds insane, I know, but it's true. In the morning, I'd check the perimeter, make sure none had wandered into the yard. If they had, I'd deal with them. A shovel worked well. Quiet, efficient. You learn where to hit. You learn not to hesitate. I started talking to myself. Not out of loneliness, though there was that too, but because silence felt heavier than noise. Morning, I'd say, stepping onto the porch. Looks like we got visitors. A couple of them would be shuffling along the street, aimless. I'd watch them for a while. Sometimes I'd think about who they used to be. Most times, I didn't. It's strange what you get used to. The smell, the quiet, the fact that the world is empty. One afternoon, maybe a month in, I'd stopped counting. I found something that changed everything. I was clearing out the garage. Boxes, old junk, tools. And then I saw it. A door. Not to the outside. To the basement. It was locked. That should have been my first warning. But curiosity has a way of overriding caution, especially when you've spent your life with nothing. I found the key in the kitchen drawer. Took me a while. My hands were shaking, though I didn't know why. When I opened that door, the smell hit me first. Rot, not fresh. I stood there for a long time, staring down into the dark. Part of me wanted to close it, walk away, pretend I never found it. That part didn't win. It never does. I grabbed the flashlight, stepped down, one creak at a time. At the bottom of the stairs, the beam of light cut through the darkness. And that's when I saw them. Chains, bolted to the wall. 3 of them. And something moving. I froze. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Because whatever was down there, it had been there long before I arrived. And it wasn't alone. The thing about fear is it doesn't always come when it should. Standing at the bottom of those basement stairs, flashlight trembling just enough to make the shadows twitch, I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel the urge to run. I felt familiar. That smell rot, stale air, something trapped. It reminded me of abandoned places I used to sleep in. Forgotten rooms, spaces people stopped caring about. Only this wasn't forgotten. This was hidden. The beam of my flashlight landed on the first chain, bolted deep into concrete, thick and rusted, pulled taut toward the far wall. And at the end of it, movement. Slow, jerky, alive, in the wrong way. It was a woman, or what used to be one. Her skin had gone gray and stretched thin over bone, her jaw working in empty bites as she strained against the chain around her neck. Her eyes, cloudy, lifeless, snapped toward the light. She lunged. The chain stopped her with a metallic jerk. A guttural sound tore out of her throat. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I'd seen plenty of them by now, up close too, close enough to smell their breath, to hear the wet grind of their teeth. But this was different, because she hadn't wandered in. She'd been put here. I moved the flashlight. Second chain. A man this time, bigger, stronger, even in decay. He thrashed harder when the light hit him, pulling against the restraint until the bolts in the wall groaned. Still held, barely. Third chain. That's the one that made my stomach turn. Not because of what was on it, because of what wasn't. The chain lay slack across the floor. The cuff at the end was open, broken. I stood there for a long time, listening. The two chained ones rasped and clawed, their movements dragging against metal and concrete. But underneath that, there was something else. A faint sound. A scrape. Somewhere deeper in the basement. That's when the fear finally showed up. Not loud. Not overwhelming. Just there. A quiet voice in the back of my head saying, "You're not alone down here." I backed up slowly. Flashlight sweeping across the room. Boxes stacked against the walls. Old furniture. A workbench, cluttered with tools. A corner the light didn't quite reach. Another scrape. Closer this time. I swallowed. "All right," I muttered to myself. "Just take a look." Talking helped. Always had. Made things feel manageable. I stepped forward. One foot, then the other. The beam of light crept into the darkness. And something moved. Fast. I barely had time to react. It came out of the corner low and fast, a blur of gray skin and snapping teeth. I stumbled back, heart slamming into my ribs as it lunged. Its jaws closed inches from my arm. Not chained. Not restrained. Free. I swung the flashlight on instinct. It connected with the side of its head with a dull crack. The thing reeled, but didn't stop. They never stop. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a rusted wrench off the workbench, and brought it down hard. Once. Twice. 3 times. It collapsed. Still, I stood over it, breathing hard, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." My hands shook now. Not from the fight. From what it meant. Someone had chained 2 of them and kept them alive. And a third had gotten loose. How long ago? Days? Weeks? Had it been roaming the house while I slept? I looked down at it. It was smaller than the others. Younger. A teenager, maybe. Its face was less gone, less decayed. I didn't like that. I dragged the body into the light and checked it over. No chains. No collar. Just torn clothes and gray skin. But its wrists, bruised, like something had been there. It hadn't broken free. It had been let out. That thought settled heavy in my chest. Because if someone had been here long enough to chain them, and smart enough to survive this long, then where were they now? I turned the flashlight back to the 2 still chained. They strained toward me, jaws snapping, eyes locked on movement. Mindless, or so I thought. The woman made a sound, different from the others. Not just hunger, something else. A memory surfaced. Not mine. Something I'd seen once, years ago. A guy going through withdrawal behind a shelter. The way he'd grown, like his body was trying to remember something it couldn't quite reach. I stepped closer. Slow. Careful. "Hey," I said. My voice echoed in the basement. The man thrashed harder. The woman stilled. Just for a second. Then she lunged again, chain snapping tight. I exhaled. Yeah, didn't think that'd work. Still, something about this wasn't right. I searched the basement more thoroughly. Drawers, cabinets, boxes, looking for anything that explained it. And I found it. A notebook, tucked under the workbench. The cover was worn, edges curled from use. I flipped it open. Page after page of writing. Neat at first, then messy, then frantic. Dates filled the margins. Notes about behavior, feeding times, restraints. My stomach tightened as I read. Subject A, retains motor function, no response to verbal stimuli. Subject B, increased aggression when exposed to light. Subject C, improvement. I turned the page. Day 18, Subject C shows delayed response to stimuli, less erratic movement, possible cognitive retention. My grip tightened on the notebook. Day 22, they're still in there. A chill ran down my spine. Day 24, if I can slow it, if I can bring them back. The writing became harder to read, more rushed, more desperate. Day 27, supplies low, had to release C to conserve resources. Mistake, mistake, mistake. I froze. Day 28, it watches me. It's different. The last entry was scrawled across the page, barely legible. I lowered the notebook slowly. Behind me, the chains rattled. The two remaining zombies pulled and snapped just like before. Mindless, hungry, but the third one, the one I just killed. I looked back at its body, at its face, at the faintest hint of something that might have once been thought. It remembers. The house didn't feel the same anymore. Not safe. Not quiet. For the first time since I'd locked those doors and claimed this place as mine, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Upstairs, the world was still, silent, familiar. But downstairs, something had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that basement wasn't the only thing that had learned how to adapt. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in the bed, yeah. I'd graduated from the floor by then. Funny how quickly you adjust, and stared at the ceiling, listening. Every sound felt louder. The house settling. The wind brushing against the siding. And underneath it all, my imagination filling in gaps with things that weren't there. The basement door stayed closed. I pushed a heavy dresser in front of it for good measure. Didn't matter that the chains held. Didn't matter that I'd checked them twice. It was the idea of it. Something down there had been different. And different meant dangerous. By morning, I forced myself back into routine. Routine keeps you alive. Routine keeps you sane. I stepped out onto the porch, shovel resting against my shoulder. "Morning," I muttered. My voice sounded rough, like it hadn't been used in years, even though I talked to myself constantly. The street looked the same as always. Empty. Still. Except for one. A lone zombie shuffled along the sidewalk, dragging one foot behind the other. Its head lolled at an angle that didn't look comfortable, if comfort was even something they could feel anymore. "All right," I sighed. "Let's get this over with." I approached from behind. quiet, steady. One clean swing. The shovel connected with a dull, wet crack. It dropped. Still. I stood there for a second, breathing out slow. Same as always. Nothing new. Nothing different. Except it didn't feel the same. I dragged the body off the street and into the ditch like I'd done a dozen times before. But my eyes kept drifting back to the house, to the door, to what was under it. Back inside, I washed up. Hands first, then face. Old habits from the street mixed with new ones from whatever this life was now. Clean water still felt like a luxury I didn't deserve, but I used it anyway. I ate breakfast at the kitchen table. Canned peaches. A piece of bread I'd baked myself burnt on one side, underdone on the other. Still tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. And then I made a decision. I wasn't leaving them down there. Not because I cared. Let's get that straight. I didn't suddenly grow a conscience. Didn't start seeing them as people. But whoever had been here before me, they had a reason. And reasons matter. So I grabbed the notebook and the shovel and went back downstairs. The dresser scraped across the floor as I shoved it aside. The lock clicked open. The door creaked. Same smell. Same darkness. "All right," I said, stepping down. "Let's try this again." They reacted instantly. Chains rattling. Jaws snapping. Same as before. I kept my distance this time. Set the notebook on the workbench. Flipped it open. Subject A, Subject B, I muttered, glancing between the pages and the two chained figures. Didn't know which was which. Didn't really matter. According to the notes, whoever had been running this little experiment fed them regularly. Measured amounts. I frowned. That's something. I hadn't thought about that part. Zombies ate. That much was obvious. But I'd never considered how often, or what happened if they didn't. I looked at them. Really looked. They were thinner than the ones outside. More controlled, somehow. Less frantic. Starving. The thought sat heavy. Not guilt, just awareness. "All right," I said slowly. "Let's see what happens." I didn't do anything stupid like get close. I'd survived this long by not being stupid. Instead, I went back upstairs, grabbed one of the bodies from the ditch. Yeah, I know. Not exactly a normal grocery run. Dragging it into the basement wasn't easy. Not physically, mentally. There's a line you don't realize you've crossed until you're already on the other side. This was one of those lines. I dropped the body a few feet out of their reach. Then I stepped back. For a second, nothing happened. Then, they smelled it. The change was instant, violent. Both of them lunged as far as their chains would allow, clawing at the floor, jaws snapping, desperate. But they couldn't reach it. I watched, waited. Minutes passed. Their movements slowed, not stopped. Just less frantic. I flipped through the notebook again. Controlled exposure reduces erratic behavior. Hunger response linked to aggression levels? I exhaled slowly. Okay. So that was it. Not just keeping them alive, studying them, managing them. I picked up a long-handled rake from the corner, hooked it under the body, dragged it a little closer. They went wild again. Chains straining, teeth snapping inches from flesh. Closer. And then they reached it. The sounds that followed. I won't describe them. Not because I can't, Because I don't need to. I turned away, sat on the bottom step, listened. Time passed. Hard to say how long. Eventually, the noise died down. When I looked back, the body was gone. Not entirely, but enough. And the two of them, they were calm, not still, not peaceful, but calmer. I leaned against the wall, notebook in hand. "All right," I said quietly. "So, that's the routine now. Morning, check the yard. Midday, tend the garden. Afternoon, deal with the basement." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It should have felt wrong. All of it. But it didn't. Because here's the truth nobody likes to admit. People don't just survive the end of the world. They adapt to it. And me? I'd been adapting my whole life. Days turned into something like structure. I started keeping track. Feeding them every couple of days. Watching. Noticing. They changed. Not in some miracle movie-style way. They didn't get better. Didn't come back. But they slowed. Their movements became less erratic. More focused. And sometimes, very rarely, they'd stop. Just for a second. Like they were listening. That's when things started to bother me again. Because it wasn't just them. It was the house. Little things. Small. Easy to ignore. A door I was sure I'd closed, slightly open. A tool not where I left it. A chair shifted just enough to notice. At first, I blamed myself. Fatigue. Stress. The kind of things that mess with your head. But then, one night, I heard footsteps. Upstairs. Slow. Deliberate. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wasn't the only one living in that house anymore. The footsteps stopped. I froze. Not because I was scared, not really, but because I knew. The house was mine. At least, I'd claimed it. I had locks on the doors, chains on the basement, a routine that kept me alive. Yet someone or something was moving upstairs, slow, deliberate, like it knew exactly what it was doing. I didn't move immediately. Instead, I listened. The wind outside rattled the window. I could hear my garden plants brushing against the fence, the soil damp from yesterday's watering. And then, silence. Almost too perfect. Too quiet. I grabbed my shovel, the same one I'd used on the street. My grip tightened around the worn wood handle. There was no time to consider what I should do, only what I could. I crept up the stairs. Step by step, each one groaning under my weight. The floorboards squeaked, echoing in the empty house. My heart hammered, loud enough to drown out the sound of my own breathing. I reached the top and stopped at the landing. Nothing. The hallway stretched ahead, doors closed. My room, the one I'd taken as mine, was at the far end. I listened again. Footsteps. Faint, coming from the kitchen. I edged closer, shovel raised. The doorframe was shadowed. I peeked around. A figure stood there. A man. Dirty, ragged. Covered in the same grime I'd been used to before the outbreak. His eyes were wild, hungry, but not like the ones downstairs. Not undead. He froze when he saw me. And I froze. Two humans in a world full of monsters. Who? Who are you? I demanded. My voice sounded sharper than I meant it. He blinked, slowly, carefully. My name, he hesitated. Eli. I didn't trust him. Didn't even like him. Not yet. But I'd learned to listen, carefully, in these streets. What do you want? I asked. Food, shelter, safety. he said. His voice trembled like he wasn't sure himself. I considered it. Humans were unpredictable, selfish, violent, and yet he looked like he'd been surviving on the edge, like I had. I nodded. All right, I said slowly, but you follow the rules. My rules. He nodded eagerly, relief washing over him. The first few days were tense. I watched him constantly, made him clean, cook, tend the garden, check the perimeter. He did it all, mostly without complaint. And the basement? He stayed away. That should have been the warning. A week passed. I started to relax, ever so slightly. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe I could trust someone again. Eli even laughed once, while I was pruning the tomato plants. It was strange, comforting, dangerous. Then, one evening, I heard it. A familiar scrape from the basement. I rushed down, heart hammering. The chains rattled violently. The two restrained ones were thrashing more than usual. I froze. Then I saw him, Eli, standing there, holding the wrench I kept on the shelf. His hands were bloody. "What?" I began. They were moving slow," he said. His eyes darted nervously. I thought I could help, make them better." I stared. This was wrong. I'd seen what happened when someone tried to help. "They'll remember," I whispered. Eli didn't understand. Or maybe he did, but didn't care. The basement erupted into chaos. Chains screeching, bodies thrashing, the smell of blood thick in the air. I grabbed the shovel, swung hard. The first one went down. The second one lunged at me. I backed away, feeling the sickening pull of their strength. Eli screamed, tried to intervene, got bit. The moment I realized what happened, my stomach turned. Eli froze, face pale, blood dripping from his forearm where the teeth had found purchase. I had a choice. I could save him, or I could save myself. I stepped back, not out of cruelty, out of survival. I didn't hesitate. One swing, the wrench fell. Eli collapsed. The basement went quiet, except for the two chained ones, still straining. I sank to the floor, chest heaving. The house had changed again. Not just the basement, not just the routines. I had changed. Days passed. I stayed upstairs more than I did before. Ate slowly, cleaned, tended the garden, but I avoided the basement. Avoidance isn't courage. It's sanity. Then, one morning, the mail slot rattled. A piece of paper slipped through, written in messy, almost childlike handwriting. "They are watching you. You are not alone." I stared at it. Cold realization washed over me. I wasn't alone in this house. I wasn't alone in this world. And whoever or whatever had been running the experiments before me was still out there. The garden didn't feel safe anymore. The street didn't feel empty. Even the basement chains, or no chains, didn't feel contained. I didn't sleep much that night. The note had rattled me more than anything Eli or the basement had done. They are watching you. Who and how? I spent the night pacing, flashlight in hand, checking every lock, every window, every door. The garden gate squeaked under my touch. The backyard was empty, the street silent. Yet something had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the way the house breathed around me. Morning came gray and cold. I ate quickly, skipped my usual long shower. Routine had to wait. It was time. Time to face the basement again. I approached the stairs slowly, shovel resting on my shoulder. Chains rattled faintly below. The two still restrained ones lay low, seemingly quiet. but I knew better. I checked the locks. Secure. I went down. The basement smelled worse than ever. Rot, blood, sweat, old fear. The chains clanged faintly as I stepped near. The notebook sat on the workbench, open to the last page I had read. I picked it up. The previous owner, the one who had conducted the experiments, had left instructions, observations, notes, warnings. One passage stood out. Subject C shows signs of memory retention. Must not be exposed to stimuli too quickly. Could compromise the experiment. Must watch. Must wait. Memory retention? That was the free one. The one Eli had, let loose. I thought about it. I realized something horrifying. This wasn't just about keeping zombies alive. It was about training them, teaching them, controlling them. And the chained ones, maybe they weren't just restrained to prevent them from escaping. Maybe they were being taught, observing, learning. I stepped closer to the two chained figures. They watched me as I moved, not frenzied, but watchful, like they were waiting for something. I decided to test it. I dragged a body, the one I had retrieved from the street the day before, closer to them. They tensed. They lunged, but not mindlessly. Their movements were calculated, measured, almost intelligent. I stepped back. A thought hit me like a blow. They are learning. They are adapting. And the basement wasn't just their prison, it was their classroom. I realized then that I'd become part of it, whether I liked it or not. Every time I fed them, every time I exposed them to the world above, I was the teacher. Days passed. I continued my routines. Garden, food, check the streets. But the basement grew in my mind. The chains, the sounds, the intelligence in those eyes, it haunted me. I began noticing patterns. They weren't attacking me anymore. Not directly. Not yet. They were testing me, watching how I moved, how I reacted. The notebook had warned of this behavioral experiment, and now, without Eli or anyone else, the experiment was mine to manage. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I went to the basement. The two chained ones were quiet, watching, waiting. I approached slowly, raising my hands, flashlight shaking slightly. And then the first one spoke. A word. Stop. I froze. Not because I was scared. I'd seen worse. Because I heard it. A zombie, speaking. Not growling. Not gurgling. A word. The second one followed. Hurt. They weren't human. Not anymore. But they were learning. Understanding. And the notebook hadn't predicted this. I stumbled back, heart racing. The basement had changed me. Not physically, not in the obvious ways, but in the way I moved through the house, the way I breathed, the way I thought. I was cautious now, hyper-aware. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper of movement felt significant. And I wasn't sure if that was survival or paranoia. Maybe it was both. That morning, I checked the garden. Sunlight fell over the rows of tomato plants, the leafy kale, the small patch of carrots I had been experimenting with. A few birds hopped between the fences, and for a moment I almost forgot what had been waiting below. Almost. Then I saw it. A shadow in the living room. I froze. The footsteps, soft, deliberate, approached from the hallway. I gripped my shovel tighter. It wasn't Eli this time, or any human. It was one of them, the one I'd killed or thought I had weeks ago, the teenager from the basement. Standing in the living room, watching. Jesus, I muttered. It tilted its head like a curious animal. Its eyes, clouded but sharper than before, tracked my movements. Then it spoke. Don't. I stumbled back. It had learned a word, not just recognition, not just instinct, language. I realized then that the basement wasn't just a prison or an experiment, it had been a classroom. The teacher was gone, but the lessons remained. I had to act fast. I grabbed a length of chain and a spare padlock from the shed and went downstairs. The two chained ones were tense but still, watching, waiting. I reinforced their chains further, every link checked, every bolt tight. And then I stared at them. "What are you learning?" I whispered. No response. Not yet. But the teenager upstairs, it had already figured out more than I had expected. I decided to adjust the routine. Feeding, observation, exposure. Not too much, not too little. Every movement, every sound, every scent, it was a lesson, a test, and I was the unwitting teacher. That night, I heard whispers again. Soft, almost human. The teenager, upstairs, learning, observing, waiting. By the next morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't keep them in chains forever, but I couldn't let them roam free either. I started building a space in the basement. Not just chains, not just restraints. A room, walls reinforced with steel sheets scavenged from the shed and nearby lots. Barriers inside, every inch calculated to contain. And in the center, a small table for observation. The two chained ones stared at me as I worked, not aggressively, not mindlessly, but with a quiet intelligence I couldn't ignore. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they changed. The chains rattled less violently. The snapping of jaws slowed. The moments of stillness grew longer. And then, for the first time, one of them, Subject B, I decided made deliberate eye contact with me and smiled. The world outside had become predictable. Empty streets, occasional wandering zombies I could dispose of without much effort. My garden thrived. My house was clean. I even managed to start baking bread properly without burning it. But the basement was the real world now. I began to notice subtle changes in the two chained ones. Subject A would follow my movements with uncanny precision, anticipating where I'd step or what I'd do next. Subject B, the one that had made eye contact and smiled, started mimicking actions I didn't directly teach, pulling, shifting, even organizing objects along the walls, almost like chores. It was insane. I was teaching zombies to function, to exist in my world. I decided to test the limits. I dragged a clean plate of food to the center of the reinforced room, careful to maintain a safe distance. "Take it," I said softly. Subject B approached, slowly, calculated, took the plate with hands that were careful, unlike the sloppy, thrashing grip I was used to. It set it down on the floor, neatly arranged. Then, for the first time, it looked up at me, and there was comprehension, recognition. I realized then that my life had shifted entirely. The zombies weren't just obstacles anymore. They were participants. My daily routine became a blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary. Morning, check the street and garden. Midday, feed and interact with the chained ones. Afternoon, document changes, maintain control, reinforce the basement. Evening, clean, prepare, observe. And the teenager, the one I thought dead, was still upstairs, occasionally appearing at the windows. Not aggressive, watching, learning. It was during one of these afternoons that I noticed something truly disturbing. I had left a corner of the basement unsecured while rearranging supplies. Subject B moved into that space, inspecting it carefully. Its movements weren't random, they were deliberate, systematic. It understood boundaries. It tested them. It remembered the rules. And then it stopped, looked at me. Not hunger, not instinct, intention. My heart sank. The notebook came back to mind. The previous owner's last notes. Subject C, the teenager. It remembers. I realized, with a jolt, Subject B wasn't just learning, it was evolving at an accelerated rate. I had no choice but to adapt. If they were learning from me, I had to integrate them into my life above ground. So I started small. First, chores I could safely supervise. Sweeping the floor, organizing tools, bringing small supplies from one room to another. They weren't perfect. They weren't human, but they were functional, reliable, and they understood when to stop. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Months passed. The house transformed. The basement became a training ground. The upstairs, my living space. And outside, well, outside became a controlled environment. I dealt with zombies, casually now. Shuffling down the street, clearing a stray or two, and returning as if it were as mundane as taking out the trash. The teenager upstairs finally made contact. No words, no aggression, just observation. And one night, the note slipped through the mail slot again. I've been watching you. You've taught them well, but now you'll see. I froze. It wasn't Eli. Not a random survivor. This was something else. Something intelligent. And I realized with a chill that my world, the house, the basement, the routine, was about to change entirely. I prepared. I reinforced every lock, every chain, every barrier. The zombies downstairs, the ones I'd integrated into my daily life, waited silently. Subject B even tilted its head, as if sensing the tension. And then I understood. The previous owner hadn't abandoned the experiment. They had left a blueprint. And I was the final stage. Because the real experiment wasn't just about zombies surviving. It was about teaching them to coexist. And now, I was part of it. I looked down at them, and for the first time, I considered it. Maybe survival wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about creating a world where the dead and the living could exist. The weeks that followed were different. I stopped thinking of the basement as a threat. Stopped thinking of the zombies as enemies. Stopped thinking of myself as merely surviving. Now I was living, really living. The two chained ones, subjects A and B, were still restrained, but their movements were precise, deliberate, almost polite. Subject B even began assisting with tasks I had never imagined teaching a zombie, sorting supplies, fetching tools, observing routines. They weren't human, but they weren't entirely lost either. And upstairs, the teenager watched. I integrated them into my daily life in small ways. They helped tend the garden, not carelessly, but with intention. I began leaving harvested vegetables on the kitchen counter, and they would clean and prepare them. They assisted in housekeeping, carrying laundry, scrubbing floors, stacking firewood. I only supervised from a safe distance. I even let them walk a short route outside under my watchful eye. The neighborhood zombies didn't dare come near. They respected our space, or maybe they just learned not to challenge the order I had established. It became normal, casual, bizarrely domestic. I had gone from a homeless man scrounging for scraps on the streets to running a household with two semi-intelligent zombies and a mysterious observing teenager as part of my family. Then came the final revelation. I was down in the basement, adjusting the chains and checking the reinforced walls, when I noticed something strange. The teenager's note had mentioned, "You'll see." I realized what that meant. I returned upstairs. There, at the top of the stairs, was the teenager. I stepped closer cautiously. "You are the experiment," I said. The teenager nodded. Slow, calculated. "Yes," they said, voice soft, almost melodic. "I remember. The experiments, the lessons, everything." It hit me like a punch. All this time, I had thought I was merely surviving. I was part of someone else's design. And the basement wasn't just a home for zombies. It was a school, a proving ground. But now, the experiment had evolved. The teenager had retained their intelligence, adapted beyond death, and the chained ones were learning too, under my guidance. I felt a shiver run through me. Then, a strange sense of pride. Not over the death and destruction, not over survival, over adaptation, over life finding a way. I knelt slowly, eye to eye, with the teenager. "So, what now?" I asked. They smiled faintly. Not human, not zombie, something in between. "We live," they said simply. I understood then. I had been given a second chance, not just to survive, but to build. And so I did. The zombies became part of my routine, not monsters lurking at the edges of society, but helpers, participants, companions. I taught them. They learned. We thrived. I walked the streets casually, clearing the odd wandering zombie, tending my garden, cooking meals, living in a house that had once been terrifying but was now a home. I even talked to them sometimes. "Don't touch the tomatoes," I'd say, and they would listen. The teenager, well, they were still watching, but now I felt we were equals, partners in this strange, new world. Months later, as I sat on the porch eating bread I had baked fresh that morning, I looked out over the street. The sun was setting. The air was crisp. The distant groans of zombies echoed faintly, but they no longer felt threatening. I exhaled. For the first time since the outbreak, I felt peace. I thought back to the streets where I had once slept, cold, dirty, invisible to the world. To the nights I scavenged for scraps, the mornings I woke with nothing to eat. And now, I had a home, a garden, companions, purpose. Even the zombies had a place. And I realized, finally, survival wasn't enough. Living, truly living, was. The basement door remained locked. The chains were reinforced. But I no longer feared what was inside. Because what was inside had become part of my life, part of my family, part of a new world. And I understood the final lesson. Control is temporary. Survival is necessary. But adaptation is everything. I smiled, taking a bite of bread. The world had ended. And somehow, we had begun again.